Imagine you wake up in a creaky bed, the kind with iron posts and a mattress stuffed with straw. The morning light barely seeps through heavy, dust-covered curtains, and the air smells faintly of coal smoke and candle wax. You stretch, but your body aches from the stiff bedding. The room is cold, so cold that your breath fogs the air. Welcome to your first morning in a Victorian house. It looks charming in paintings and movies, but living here? That's a different story. The truth is, most people today wouldn't last 24 hours inside one. Before we begin, make sure you're tucked in comfortably, ready to drift into the past. If you enjoy sinking into these historical worlds before sleep, don't forget to subscribe to History for Sleep. It helps more people find these calming stories from the past. And in the comments, tell us what parts of history you'd like to dream about next, and when you usually listen in. We read them all, and love hearing what you're curious about. Now, close your eyes, take a slow breath, and imagine stepping through the front door of a Victorian home. The year is somewhere around 1885. The Industrial Revolution has filled cities with soot and smoke. Inside, the furniture is ornate, the air heavy with polish and perfume, and the house feels alive in a strange way. Beneath all that elegance lies constant discomfort, endless chores, and 1,000 unspoken rules. Every moment is a test of endurance, especially for someone used to modern comfort. The warmth of central heating, the ease of a light switch, the freedom of soft fabrics, all gone. By the end of this story, you will see why even one day in a Victorian house would feel like a marathon of survival. The past may seem beautiful, but beauty in the Victorian era came with a cost. So, let's begin your 24-hour journey into the heart of the 19th century, where every minute would test your patience, your senses, and your sanity. This is what it would really be like to live inside a Victorian house, and why you wouldn't last 24 hours. You step through the door, and immediately the air changes. It's heavier, scented with coal smoke, beeswax, and something faintly musty like the lingering ghost of damp wool and furniture polish. The door shuts behind you with a deep wooden thud, and suddenly the sounds of the outside world fade. No hum of cars, no buzz of electricity, just the quiet creak of floorboards and the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. For a moment, you think the silence feels peaceful until you realize how absolute it is. Every shuffle of your feet, every breath, seems too loud. Your eyes adjust to the dimness. Even though it's morning, the house feels dark. Heavy drapes block out most of the daylight, not for comfort, but to keep the furniture from fading. Gaslight fixtures cling to the walls, but they aren't lit yet. You can see the faint soot stains above them, small black halos left by years of use. The wallpaper, with its deep maroon pattern, almost seems to close in around you. Everything here feels ornate, over-decorated, and strangely suffocating. You can't quite shake the feeling that you've stepped into a museum, but one you can't leave. You try to walk, but your modern shoes slide a little on the polished wooden floor. The rugs are thick and uneven, worn down by years of use. Dust motes swirl in the air as you move. A maid passes silently in the background, eyes lowered, her footsteps barely making a sound. She doesn't speak. Victorian servants were expected to move like shadows, seen but not heard. The stillness of the house feels unnatural. You're used to the constant hum of appliances, the buzz of a phone, the distant rhythm of traffic. Here, your heartbeat feels loud enough to echo. Then the temperature hits you. The air is chilly, even indoors. You can see your breath near the windows, and a faint draft snakes around your ankles. The single fireplace in the parlor glows weakly, barely warming the room. In the Victorian era, heating was a luxury that didn't reach every corner of the house. Bedrooms, hallways, even dining rooms often stayed cold all day. You might find yourself clutching your arms, searching for warmth, only to realize that's just how people lived then layered up. constantly cold and resigned to it. You glance around the room, taking in the clutter. Every surface seems to hold something. Porcelain figurines, family portraits, dried flowers, heavy curtains, ornate clocks. There's a kind of beauty to it, but also a weight of feeling that everything must be kept exactly as it is. Victorian homes were filled with possessions, a reflection of status and order. Dusting all of it took hours each day, and yet the air never really felt clean. Without modern ventilation, smoke and soot settled on every surface, leaving a faint grime behind. You might think about sitting down, but even that's uncomfortable. The furniture looks plush, but it's stiff and upright. Sofas were meant for proper posture, not relaxation. Slouching was considered impolite, even sinful. You perch on the edge of a chair, feeling its horsehair stuffing press against your legs. The fabric smells faintly of dampness and polish. Every breath reminds you that air fresheners and disinfectants haven't been invented yet. What you smell is simply the truth of the house, a mixture of people, coal, and time. After a few minutes, the quiet becomes oppressive. You can hear faint voices in the next room, perhaps the master of the house, speaking with his wife, but even those sound subdued, careful, almost rehearsed. In the Victorian household, social hierarchy ruled everything. Servants kept to their quarters. Children spoke only when spoken to. Women were expected to manage the household, but rarely relax in it. You begin to sense that this house isn't just a home, it's a performance, one that must be maintained constantly. If you were to glance out the window, the world beyond would look gray. Smoke from nearby chimneys curls into the air, mixing with fog. The streets are wet with mud and soot. Yet inside, the family prides itself on maintaining appearances. You might find yourself coughing faintly as your lungs adjust to the smoky air, wondering how anyone could live this way day after day. But for them, this was life normal, even respectable. Your first hour in this Victorian home has barely begun, but already the discomforts start to pile up. The cold, the silence, the stiffness in your body, the smell that lingers on your clothes. You feel out of place, trapped in a slower rhythm of life. There's beauty here, yes, but it's a beauty that demands effort and endurance. By the time the clock chimes the next hour, you're already wondering how you'll make it through the day. And as the chime fades into the stillness, the real challenge begins. The first morning in a Victorian house starts long before you're ready for it. There's no gentle hum of an alarm clock, no glowing phone screen to ease you awake. Instead, it's the sound of movement, the faint shuffle of servants downstairs, the clatter of coal being shoveled into the hearth, the echo of boots on wood. The air in your room is icy, and the fire has long gone out. You pull the covers tighter, but the chill bites at your face, your fingers, your nose. Getting up feels like a test of willpower. And yet, for the Victorians, this was just another ordinary day. You swing your feet to the floor, and the cold bites through the thin wool socks. There's no carpet in most rooms, only worn floorboards, and they hold the night's chill like stone. You reach for the water jug and basin sitting on the washstand nearby. The water is from last night's fetch by the maid, and it's freezing. You dip your hands in to wash your face, and the shock of the cold runs down your spine. There's no warm tap, no steam, no soap with a pleasant scent, just a bar of harsh lye or carbolic soap that smells faintly of medicine. People of the time believed cleanliness was next to godliness, but the act itself was anything but heavenly. As you wash, you notice how dim the light is. The curtains are heavy, meant to keep in warmth, though they do little good. The single candle or oil lamp flickers weakly, leaving corners in shadow. You can hear the muffled sounds of the household, awakening below the cook stoking the range, the maid lighting fires, the distant clang of pots. The air begins to smell faintly of smoke and coal. That smell never really leaves. It seeps into the walls, the sheets, and even your hair. Victorian homes lived and breathed coal. Now comes the task of dressing. For a woman, this means layers, so many layers. A chemise, drawers, stockings, corset, petticoats, perhaps a bustle, and then the gown itself. Dressing isn't something you do alone, unless you're very skilled. Most upper or middle-class women relied on a maid to help tighten the corset, lacing it up until breathing becomes shallow and stiff. Standing still as the laces pull tighter, you'd feel your ribs compress. Your posture becomes perfect, because it has to be. Bending over, sitting comfortably, or taking a deep breath becomes an effort. The beauty of the hourglass figure comes at the cost of comfort, and by mid-morning, you'll already feel the ache in your back. If you're a man, your morning isn't much easier. You'd start with wool undergarments, a stiff collar, perhaps a waistcoat, a shirt that must be buttoned all the way, and then the layers of your suit. Even in summer, formality ruled. A respectable gentleman wouldn't be caught without his jacket. Comfort, as we understand it, was considered lazy. Every item of clothing was meant to show discipline, structure, and social standing. The tighter and more restrictive, the more respectable you appeared. Downstairs, servants are already hours ahead of you. The scullery maid likely rose before dawn to carry buckets of water, clean ashes from the grates, and lay new fires throughout the house. Coal dust clings to her skin and clothes, and by the time you sit down for breakfast, she's been working for hours. The cook's hands are chapped from cold water and constant scrubbing, and the housemaid's apron is already gray with soot. The lower class's morning routine wasn't a moment of self-care, it was hard labor. If you had to live one morning in their shoes, you'd feel the exhaustion before the day had even begun. You might wander to the dressing table to comb your hair. The brush is heavy, the mirror slightly warped, and the combs made of bone or tortoiseshell. Hair was rarely washed once every week or two, if that. Instead, people used dry powders or perfumes to freshen it. For women, hair had to be pinned up properly before appearing in public. A single loose strand could be seen as untidy, even indecent. Men, too, were expected to maintain their appearance. Facial hair was fashionable, but only if trimmed neatly. You might use pomade thick and greasy to tame your hair, the scent strong and oily. Breakfast preparation fills the air with a mix of aromas. Bacon frying, tea brewing, bread toasting on the hearth. Yet beneath it, all lingers the smell of coal smoke. You can feel the grit on your fingers if you touch the windowsill. The fire is roaring now, and the air grows warmer, but it's a dry, smoky warmth that leaves your throat raw. Servants scurry to set the table while trying to stay unseen. They speak in hushed tones, mindful of the master's presence. As you finally make your way to the dining room, you notice your reflection in the hallway mirror. The corset forces your shoulders back, your chin high. Your breathing is shallow, and you can feel the faint weight of dust in the air. You look elegant, perhaps even stately, but every inch of comfort has been sacrificed for the sake of appearance. The morning has only just begun, and already your body protests. If you were to live here, every day would start like this: cold water, stiff clothing, the constant hum of labor from unseen hands. The Victorian morning was not gentle or peaceful. It was a quiet struggle wrapped in ritual. The sun might rise outside, but inside these walls, time feels slower, heavier, and far less forgiving. You would already be counting the hours until night, not realizing that in this house, the night brings its own challenges. If there's one thing that would strike you most about living in a Victorian house, it's the air itself. You can see it, almost taste it, the heavy, smoky thickness that clings to your throat. The Victorians didn't have air purifiers or central ventilation. The very idea of fresh air was complicated, often misunderstood, and sometimes feared. Windows were rarely opened, especially in winter, because drafts were believed to cause illness. So, the air you breathe is the same air that's been circling in the house for days, maybe weeks, carrying with it the scent of coal smoke, candles, and human life. In the main rooms, a constant haze lingers. Every fireplace in the home burns coal or wood, filling the air with soot and fine dust. If you touch a curtain or picture frame, you'll see a faint black smear on your fingers. It's inescapable. Gas lamps hiss faintly, releasing their own sharp odor that mixes with the smell of hot metal and oil. Some wealthier homes used whale oil lamps, which burned brighter but gave off an unmistakable fishy scent. Imagine trying to relax or fall asleep while that faint tongue of burnt oil and soot lingers around you. Perfumes and air fresheners did exist, but they were heavy and cloying. People burned incense or used pomander-scented balls filled with herbs, flowers, and citrus to mask the smell of smoke, unwashed bodies, and the occasional waft from chamber pots or the kitchen. But rather than making things better, these scents simply layered over the odors, creating a confusing cocktail of sweetness, rot, and coal. The Victorian sense of clean wasn't sterile, it was fragrant. A room didn't have to smell fresh. It just had to smell expensive. Bathrooms were another contributor to the home's aroma. If your Victorian house had plumbing at all, it was primitive. Pipes often leaked or backed up, and the smell of sewage could drift through the house, especially on humid days. In many homes, chamber pots were used and emptied only once or twice a day by servants, and that alone could fill the upper floors with an unmistakable sourness. A whiff of ammonia, mixed with the faint earthy smell of coal, would hover in the background, blending into daily life so completely that most people no longer noticed it. In the kitchen, the air is even thicker. Coal ranges burn nearly all day, heating pots of boiling water and food. The scent of roasted meat, grease, and smoke fills the air, and the stone walls trap it. Ventilation hoods didn't yet exist, so whatever is cooked below eventually drifts upward through the house. By mid-morning, even the nicest sitting room smells faintly of breakfast toast, bacon fat, and coal ash. The rich would have their homes filled with flowers to combat this. Lily, lavender, or rose petals in bowls of water added color and fragrance, though within a day or two, the water would go stale and the flowers would wilt, creating a different kind of odor. Every season brings its own set of smells. In winter, the air is dry and thick with smoke. In summer, it's damp and heavy with mildew. Without modern insulation, walls absorb moisture. You'd smell the faint musk of damp plaster, old wood, and mold creeping in unseen corners. Clothes stored in wardrobes pick up that same scent, a mixture of dust and age. Sheets smell faintly of soap and starch, but never truly clean, since washing and drying were done by hand, often indoors near the fire. When you lie down at night, the faint scent of smoke still lingers on your pillow. Even the people themselves carried a distinctive aroma. Bathing was infrequent, and laundry days were exhausting events that happened once a week at best. People used perfumes, scented oils, and powders to hide body odors, but these simply blended with the smoke and coal dust. The result was an unmistakable Victorian smell, earthy, smoky, slightly sour, and strangely human. It was a scent that told a story of effort, endurance, and adaptation. Everyone smelled like the age they lived in. And then there were the hidden sources of smell that you wouldn't notice right away. Candles made from tallow-rendered animal fat were still common among the middle and lower classes. When they burned, they released a faint odor of cooked meat mixed with smoke. Floors were polished with beeswax or turpentine-based products, which gave off their own strong aroma. Cleaning meant using vinegar, soap made from ash or carbolic acid. The result was an environment where every breath carried a dozen subtle scents, each one a reminder of the labor behind keeping a Victorian house running. If you've ever enjoyed the faint fragrance of a candle or the fresh smell of detergent on clean sheets, those pleasures didn't exist here. The Victorians lived surrounded by scent, both good and bad, and they accepted it as natural. The smoky fog that filled their cities seeped into their homes, their clothes, even their lungs. To breathe in a Victorian house was to inhale a history of industrial life and domestic effort. By now, your throat might feel dry, your eyes sting just a little. You might long to open a window, to let in a gust of cool, clean air. But that would be unthinkable for most Victorians, too risky, too modern, too rebellious against the way things were done. So you take another slow breath of that thick, living air, and understand that comfort wasn't the goal here. Survival was. And it was only the beginning of your 24 hours in the house. Cold is not just a feeling in a Victorian house. It's a presence, a living thing that moves through the walls and creeps under every door. Even in the grandest homes, warmth was a constant battle, one that most people never truly won. You wake in the morning to the sound of the fire being coaxed back to life, a soft rustling of kindling and coal in the grate. A faint orange glow flickers across the walls, and for a moment you feel relief. But that warmth only stretches a few feet from the fireplace. Beyond that, the chill reclaims its ground. Central heating, as we know, it didn't exist. Most homes relied entirely on individual fireplaces, each room its own small world of warmth. Servants spent hours every day cleaning out ashes, hauling coal scuttles, and relighting fires. The process was dirty, exhausting, and endless. And if you were a guest or member of the household, you depended on their diligence to stay comfortable. Forget to light one hearth, and that room would be uninhabitable. Bedrooms upstairs were the coldest of all. The heat never rose enough to matter, and the wind found its way through every crack and window frame. Sleeping in winter meant wearing a nightcap, socks, and sometimes gloves. Even then, the frost would creep along the inside of the glass by morning. Coal was everywhere. It was the lifeblood of the Victorian home-feeding stoves, ranges, and hearths, but it was also its curse. Coal dust settled on everything, turning curtains gray and leaving a faint taste of ash in the air. The smell clung to your clothes, your hair, your skin. A fire was beautiful when it burned bright, the heart of a room, but the work behind it was relentless. Ash had to be scraped out daily, the grates polished, and the coal bucket refilled. Sparks were dangerous, too. Fires were a constant risk, and the combination of open flames, dry fabrics, and gaslight meant that disaster could strike with a single ember. If you think of comfort as being wrapped in warmth, a Victorian house would disappoint you. The warmth was uneven, fleeting, and smoky. Sit too close to the hearth, and your face might burn while your back froze. The fire's crackle provided company in the quiet, but it was also a reminder of fragility. The instant the coal burned low, the cold would reclaim the space. Servants knew this rhythm well, waking before dawn to rekindle every fire, their hands blackened with soot before breakfast was even served. Even the process of lighting a fire wasn't simple. Coal had to be layered with wood and paper, then coaxed into flame with patience. Damp coal would sputter and smoke, filling the room with a choking haze until it caught properly. A poorly drafted chimney could send that same smoke curling back into the house. You'd cough, your eyes would sting, and yet there was no other option. Fire was both necessity and burden. Without it, water froze in basins, ink stiffened in pens, and life slowed to a shivering crawl. For wealthier families, there might be a kitchen range, or even an early boiler system that distributed a trickle of warm air or water through pipes. But these were unreliable, expensive, and limited. The idea of steady warmth throughout a house was still decades away. In most homes, family members gathered around the fire out of necessity, their chairs pulled close, their hands extended to the flames. The hearth was more than heat, it was the emotional center of the household. It drew people together not out of affection, but out of survival. The cost of fuel was another constant concern. Coal was expensive, and the lower classes often burned whatever they could find. Scraps of wood, peat, even dried dung in rural areas. The smoke from these made the air nearly unbreathable, turning walls black and lungs heavy. Many Victorian children grew up with chronic coughs and soot-stained hands from tending fires. If you were a servant in such a home, your days revolved around it, feeding fires, emptying ashes, cleaning grates, and still freezing in your own small quarters once your work was done. At night, the cold returned with a vengeance. Once the fires burned out, the temperature dropped sharply. The silence was broken only by the faint ticking of the clock and the distant rattle of windows against the wind. Beds were layered with thick quilts, wool blankets, and heavy drapes. Some households used warming pans, small metal trays filled with hot coals, to heat the sheets before bedtime. But these came with risks too. If left too long, they could scorch the linen or even start a fire. There were no thermostats, no steady hum of radiators. Just the long, slow fade of heat into darkness. You might think to move closer to the fire for comfort, but even that comes at a price. Your eyes sting from the smoke. Your clothes absorb the scent, and the soot settles in your hair. The warmth feels earned, but never secure. In the grand illusion of Victorian luxury, heat was always just out of reach. It was something you had to chase, to tend, to deserve. And for all its beauty, the carved mantels, the flickering glow of the fire, was a reminder of how fragile comfort really was. As you sit watching the flames dance in the hearth, you realize that this single fire is the line between endurance and misery. Step away for too long, and the chill will find you again. It seeps through walls, curls under doors, and whispers through the cracks. The Victorian house breathes cold, no matter how many fires you light. And in that endless struggle to stay warm, you start to understand why a single day in this world would leave you utterly exhausted. As daylight fades, you begin to understand another truth about the Victorian house. It was a world built on shadows. When the sun went down, darkness crept in fast, and the home became an island of dim, flickering light. There are no switches to flip, no gentle hum of electricity. Instead, you must rely on candles, oil lamps, and gas lights, each beautiful in its own way, but each demanding constant care, attention, and a tolerance for smoke and smell that would drive most modern people mad. The first thing you notice as the evening deepens is how dark dim truly is. Even with multiple candles burning, the light barely reaches the corners of the room. Shadows dance across the wallpaper, and the edges of furniture fade into the gloom. The flame flickers every time someone passes by, disturbed by the faintest draft. You squint as you read or write, eyes straining in the low glow. This is how Victorians lived every night, leaning close to their books, their sewing, or one another, surrounded by a haze of light and smoke. Candles were the simplest form of illumination, but they came with their own burdens. The poor used tallow candles made from animal fat, which gave off a smoky flame and a sour, greasy smell. When they burned, they dripped, sputtered, and left stains of wax on every surface. Wealthier homes could afford beeswax candles, which burned cleaner and smelled faintly sweet, but even these needed constant trimming. Every half hour or so, someone had to snuff the wick, trim it, and relight it to prevent excessive smoke. Candles were expensive, so they were used sparingly. Entire rooms would remain dark to conserve them, and families gathered close together under a few flames to make the most of the light. Oil lamps were a step up brighter, steadier, and longer lasting, but they too came with their own difficulties. The oil was thick and pungent, often made from whale fat or later kerosene. A careless refill could leave your hands slick and smelling for hours. Lamps needed to be cleaned daily. The glass chimneys blackened with soot, and if left unattended, the buildup would choke the flame and fill the room with smoke. A servant's hands were often stained from the task, the smell clinging no matter how much scrubbing they did. Every evening was a ritual of lighting, trimming, and maintaining the delicate balance between brightness and smoke. For the upper classes, gas lighting was the height of sophistication. Long pipes carried gas through the walls to ornate fixtures in the parlor and hallway. But even this marvel came with danger. The gas had a distinct odor, sharp and metallic, and leaks were common. One careless twist of a valve could fill a room with invisible poison. People often felt dizzy or nauseous after spending long hours under gaslight, their heads aching from the fumes. The light itself was harsh and flickering, casting an eerie yellow glow that distorted colors and shadows. At night, when all the flames were extinguished, the faint smell of gas lingered, a reminder of how fragile safety was in a world lit by fire. Imagine walking through the house at night. The halls are dim, the floorboards groan beneath your feet, and the only light comes from the small candle you hold. Its glow barely stretches beyond your arm's reach. Every step feels uncertain. The flicker of flame casts moving shadows that look almost alive on the walls. If you were to descend the stairs, the wax would drip onto your hand, hot enough to sting. A sudden gust through a cracked window could snuff it out completely, leaving you in instant blackness. In that darkness, your heart would race, for even the bravest Victorians feared the pitch black of their own homes. And yet, for all its danger and inconvenience, this dance of light and dark gave the Victorian home a particular atmosphere. It was soft and quiet, made for whispers and reflection. Rooms glowed with a living warmth, but one that came at a price. The ceilings blackened over time, stained by years of soot. The curtains held the faint perfume of oil and smoke. Every morning, servants wiped away the residue of the previous night's light, the smudges, the ashes, the melted wax. You begin to feel the weight of it all, the labor behind every small comfort, the endless repetition of lighting and cleaning. You can't simply walk into a room and expect light. You must earn it, maintain it, tend it. And the effort doesn't end when the flame dies. The soot lingers in the air, settling on your skin and your lungs, on the fabric of your clothes. Your throat feels dry, your eyes sting faintly. The house glows faintly, yes, but it also breathes smoke. When bedtime finally approaches, each candle must be snuffed carefully, each lamp extinguished without spilling oil or spreading flame. Many a Victorian home burned to the ground from a single forgotten candle left too near a curtain. The process of darkening the house is slow, deliberate. One by one, the rooms fall into shadow. The flicker fades, and silence returns. The faint scent of burnt wick and oil drifts through the hallways, mingling with the cool night air that seeps under the doors. To live by firelight is to live in rhythm with danger. Every glow, every spark is both comfort and threat. For Victorians, light was not something to take for granted. It was a fleeting miracle that had to be earned and respected. And as you sit there, watching the final flame gutter and die, the house settles into its natural state, dark, quiet, and utterly alive with secrets waiting in the shadows. By the time the morning chill gives way to a faint warmth, the household has already been awake for hours. The clatter of dishes, the rhythmic scrape of a broom, the faint hum of voices downstairs, all signs that breakfast is being prepared. But in a Victorian house, even breakfast is not a simple comfort. It is ceremony, hierarchy, and quiet labor disguised as civility. The smell of toast and tea drifts faintly through the air, but beneath it lies the scent of coal smoke and grease. The table may look elegant, but everything about it, from the preparation to the posture, requires effort. If you were to walk into the dining room, you'd be struck first by the formality. The table is set with precision, silverware polished to a gleam, dishes laid out in perfect symmetry, a crisp white cloth freshly pressed by hand. Each place has a proper arrangement, and every utensil has its place. The room itself is hushed, except for the faint ticking of a clock and the muffled crackle of the fire. There's a sense that you are stepping into a performance. Meals in the Victorian era were not only for nourishment, they were a reflection of discipline, class, and control. The food looks hearty, but even simple dishes took hours to prepare. The cook, usually already exhausted before dawn, would have risen in darkness to stoke the kitchen range, fetch water, and prepare bread, eggs, and meat by hand. In the scullery, a maid scours pans blackened with soot, while others peel vegetables or wash dishes in icy water. If you were to glance into the kitchen, you'd find it hot, smoky, and noisy a world away from the quiet refinement of the dining room upstairs. Every meal you enjoy is built on someone else's endless work. The menu for breakfast depends on the household's wealth. In a well-to-do family, you might find bacon, eggs, porridge, toast, jam, and perhaps a bit of kipper or smoked fish. For the poor, breakfast might be no more than bread, dripping, or tea. Tea was sacred in Victorian life, poured carefully, never sloshed. Sugar, imported from faraway colonies, was a luxury that symbolized sophistication. Yet even these seemingly simple foods carried danger. Milk could sour quickly without refrigeration, meat spoiled in the warmth of the kitchen, and utensils cleaned with dirty water might spread illness. Food safety was still a fragile idea. Imagine lifting your teacup-fine porcelain, delicate and warm, and taking that first sip. The flavor is earthy, slightly smoky, rich with tannins. But the milk that clouds, it may have been watered down, or worse, adulterated. During the 19th century, dishonest sellers often mixed chalk or plaster into milk to increase profit, or added boric acid to mask the sourness. Bread, too, might contain alum, used to make cheap flour look whiter. These hidden poisons found their way into daily meals without most people realizing it. The Victorian table may look refined, but beneath the silver and lace lies the silent threat of contamination. As you eat, conversation is gentle, careful. There's no laughing loudly, no slouching, no rushing. Etiquette governs every movement. You hold your fork in your left hand, your knife in your right, and you never let your elbows touch the table. Napkins rest neatly on laps. Eye contact is polite, but not too prolonged. For the mistress of the house, breakfast is both nourishment and performance. She must pour tea gracefully, attend to her husband's plate, and speak with poise. Even the servants must follow invisible rules. They move quietly, speak softly, and never interrupt. The breakfast table itself is a microcosm of Victorian society, orderly, hierarchical, and fragile. The master of the house sits at the head, his authority unspoken but understood. The children, if present, eat in silence, their manners under constant watch. If something spills, even by accident, embarrassment fills the room like smoke. A misplaced spoon or a crumb on the tablecloth might not ruin a day, but it could spark disapproval. Every action has meaning, every gesture a lesson in restraint. The smell of fried food lingers after the meal, clinging to fabrics and curtains. The air is thick with a combination of butter, coal, and polish. Servants immediately begin clearing the table, stacking plates carefully, scraping leftovers into a basin. There is no dishwasher, no running water, no easy cleanup. Washing must be done by hand, in scalding or freezing water, depending on what's available. You might hear the faint clink of porcelain and the hiss of boiling water from the kitchen below. The servants work quickly, silently, as if the house itself demands quiet perfection. For all its elegance, eating in a Victorian house is not relaxing. It's a ritual wrapped in discomfort. The food is heavy and hot, the air smoky, the posture rigid. You can't just enjoy the moment. You must maintain composure. Even pleasure is disciplined. Every bite reminds you that comfort is secondary to order. You feel the corset tighten as you lean forward. You take care not to cough or clear your throat too loudly. You sip tea slowly, pretending not to notice the faint film that forms on its surface from the milk. And when it's all over, the quiet lingers. The fire pops softly. The silverware glints faintly in the low light. The family disperses to their duties, some to work, some to manage the household, some to continue the endless labor of cleaning. The servants clear the plates, and the house exhales once more. You might feel full, but not satisfied. There's no joy in this meal, only a strange sort of duty. As you leave the table, the smell of coal smoke follows you. It clings to your clothes, your hair, even your skin. You can't escape it. And as you look back at the pristine table, you realize the truth. Beauty in a Victorian house was always built on effort, endless, invisible effort. Even breakfast, the simplest of meals, was a small performance in the theater of endurance that defined the age. The Victorian house might look beautiful in paintings shining floors, crisp linens, gleaming silver, but that illusion was built on the weary shoulders of those who cleaned it. The truth was that every ounce of beauty, every sparkle of brass or gleam of wood, came at the cost of endless, back-breaking labor. The housemaid's life was one of constant motion. There were no vacuum cleaners, no running water, no convenient sprays or soft cloths. Every task had to be done by hand, every stain scrubbed, every surface dusted daily. The grind began before dawn and ended long after the family had gone to bed. If you woke early enough, you would hear the housemaid's footsteps before the first light of morning. Barely more than a child in many cases, she would rise in the freezing dark of her tiny attic room, dress quietly, and descend to begin her day. Her first task, clean and relight every fire. The air was thick with ash as she scooped out yesterday's soot, careful not to spill or breathe it in too deeply. She polished the grate, fetched coal from the shed, laid kindling, and coaxed the flame to life all before the family stirred. Her hands would already be blackened, her apron gray with dust, yet her day hadn't truly begun. Once the fires were lit, she'd sweep the hallways and stairs. Victorian homes had no vacuum, no mop with a handle, just a broom, a dustpan, and a rag. Every speck of soot that escaped from the fireplaces would settle across the floors and walls, so cleaning was endless. Carpets had to be beaten by hand, dragged outside, and struck repeatedly with a wicker beater to drive out the dust. Curtains, too, gathered grime from the coal smoke. A maid might spend an entire morning simply shaking, brushing, and wiping, and still the air never truly cleared. Polishing was an art form. Brass knobs, door handles, picture frames, candlesticks, all needed to shine. The polish itself was thick and sharp-smelling, made from mixtures of vinegar, oil, or even turpentine. The scent filled the house, catching in the back of the throat. The housemaid's hands were often rough and cracked from exposure to these chemicals, her nails stained and broken. She worked silently, moving from room to room like a ghost, always aware that she was to be seen as little as possible. A servant's presence was meant to be invisible, her labor noticed only by its results. Dusting was another constant task, though nearly impossible in a world of soot. The Victorian love of clutter vases, books, trinkets, doilies, framed photographs, and ornaments turned every surface into a challenge. Each item had to be lifted, cleaned beneath, and replaced exactly as before. To a housemaid, cleaning wasn't just physical labor, it was a kind of ritual precision, one that required attention far beyond exhaustion. Laundry day was its own torment. Without washing machines or indoor plumbing, clothes had to be scrubbed by hand in tubs of water fetched from the pump. Boiling water was heated over a coal fire, soap was grated and dissolved, and then every garment was worked against a washboard until the knuckles bled. Whites were boiled and bleached, then wrung out and hung to dry. Ironing came next, using heavy cast-iron presses heated over a stove. There was no temperature control, no steam, just weight, sweat, and trial. The heat would fill the room, the air thick with the metallic scent of hot iron and damp fabric. By the time the family sat down for lunch, the maid would already be halfway through her 14-hour day. There were chamber pots to empty, floors to scrub, boots to polish, and beds to make. Cleaning the bedrooms was a delicate balance of speed and silence. She had to enter quietly, collect linens, smooth the sheets, and dust without ever waking or disturbing her employers. If she was unlucky, she'd be called away mid-task to fetch something or assist elsewhere. The rhythm of her day wasn't her own, it belonged entirely to the household's needs. The tools of her trade were simple and brutal: brushes, rags, vinegar, soap, elbow grease. Her wages were meager, barely enough for her own keep. Yet despite it all, she was expected to maintain perfect composure, perfect obedience, and perfect results. Any sign of fatigue or frustration would be labeled as insolence. Many housemaids developed chronic coughs from inhaling soot or skin rashes from constant exposure to cleaning agents. There were no days off, no comfort, no luxury. Even sleep was brief and broken, interrupted by the demands of the house. For the middle or upper-class family she served, cleanliness symbolized morality. A well-kept home reflected a well-ordered mind and soul. But the people who upheld that illusion were often invisible, their humanity overlooked. You might glance at a gleaming parlor or spotless hallway and admire its beauty, never realizing that behind it stood hours of aching hands and weary lungs. If you were to step into her shoes for a single day, you'd feel the endless weight of repetition. The way your back would burn from bending over the same stairs, the same floors, the same hearths. The smell of polish would cling to your clothes. The sting of ash would never leave your throat. You'd go to sleep still smelling of smoke and soap, your body trembling with fatigue, knowing that tomorrow would begin exactly the same way. The Victorian housemaid's grind was not just physical, it was emotional. The silence, the invisibility, the knowledge that her best efforts would go unspoken. The world above her head might glitter with chandeliers and shining silver, but she lived in the dim spaces beneath, keeping that illusion alive. Every shining floor and every spotless curtain in a Victorian house was a testament to her endurance. And as the family enjoyed the comfort she created, she simply faded into the background, tired, quiet, and unseen. Of all the discomforts in a Victorian house, few would shock the modern visitor more than the bathroom, or rather, the absence of one. For most of the 19th century, indoor plumbing was a luxury that only the wealthiest could afford. Even in those homes, the systems were unreliable, noisy, and often foul-smelling. For everyone else, the morning visit to the privy meant stepping outside, even in the bitter cold, to a wooden shed in the garden. The romantic charm of a Victorian home fades quickly when you realize just how complicated and unpleasant daily hygiene could be. If you were staying in a respectable upper-middle-class house, you might find a water closet, a small room with a wooden seat and an early flushing mechanism. But don't be fooled by the term. The flush, when it worked at all, was weak and slow. Water pressure was inconsistent, and the pipes often froze in winter. Worse still, early plumbing systems connected directly to open sewers or cesspools beneath the house. Each flush simply sent the problem somewhere else, sometimes right back through the pipes. The air in such a room was thick, damp, and heavy with the unmistakable odor of human waste and ammonia. To mask it, people burned incense or kept bowls of vinegar nearby, but the smell always returned. Most homes weren't so fortunate. The average household relied on chamber pots, kept beneath the bed, emptied each morning by servants. Imagine the discomfort of hearing those ceramic pots clink and slosh as they were carried down narrow staircases, often spilling slightly along the way. Emptying them was one of the lowest and most despised tasks in service, dirty, smelly, and never-ending. The pots were rinsed in cold water and returned upstairs, ready to begin the cycle again. No amount of lavender water or perfume could disguise the truth of it. For poorer families or those in the countryside, The situation was even worse. The privy, a small outhouse at the back of the property, was often little more than a moor, hole in the ground with a wooden plank above it. In cities, these outdoor toilets might serve several families, creating terrible hygiene problems. Flies swarmed in summer, and in winter, the cold made each visit a painful ordeal. The smell was overwhelming. Some tried to sprinkle lime or ashes into the pit to reduce the odor, but the effect was minimal. You can imagine the dread of needing to go in the middle of the night, lantern in hand, crossing the freezing yard in slippers and thin clothes. The wealthy, of course, had grander arrangements, baths carved from marble or copper, sometimes even with piped-in water. But even those came with their own set of troubles. Hot water was a luxury that required time and labor. A servant had to heat bucket after bucket on the kitchen range and carry them upstairs one by one. It could take over an hour to fill a single bath, and by the time it was ready, the water might already be cooling. Once the bath was over, the entire process repeated in reverse, as the tub was emptied by hand. For that reason, full baths were rare. Most people settled for sponge baths, wiping themselves down with a cloth and a bowl of water that quickly grew gray and tepid. The Victorians had a complicated relationship with hygiene. Cleanliness was seen as a moral virtue, yet the means to achieve it were difficult and unpleasant. Soap was harsh and drying, often made with animal fat or carbolic acid, leaving skin raw. Washing hair was a rare event once every week or two at most, because it was such an ordeal. Without running water, rinsing was nearly impossible. Women relied on hair powders, combs, and perfumes to maintain appearances. Men wiped their faces with cold cloths in the morning, occasionally braving a basin shave that left their skin nicked and red. For both, the sense of freshness was something achieved through scent rather than true cleanliness. And then there was the water itself. In urban areas, water supplies were often contaminated. Rivers and wells received waste from nearby homes, and outbreaks of cholera and typhoid were common. The Great Stink of 1858, when the Thames became so polluted that Londoners could barely stand the smell, led to major sewer reforms, but even then, the average home remained unsanitary by modern standards. Every bucket of water drawn from a pump carried potential danger. You might wash your hands after the privy, but the water you used could make you just as sick. Bathrooms, when they existed, were dark, cold, and functional. Tiled floors were rare, so wooden boards absorbed moisture and odors. The sound of water dripping from a leaky tap echoed through the still air. The mirror fogged quickly from steam, and condensation formed along the window, feeding mold in the corners. The smell of dampness never fully disappeared. Even bathing was not the private, serene ritual we imagine today. It was a chore, a noisy and uncomfortable process that left the room smelling of soap, wet fabric, and smoke from the fire that heated the water. Imagine trying to live a single day with these routines. Each moment of hygiene becomes a challenge, every action surrounded by discomfort. You'd hesitate before touching the basin, flinch at the cold water, and wrinkle your nose at the ever-present odor. You'd feel grateful for even the faintest scent of lavender or lemon oil, the only thing standing between you and the smell of the century. And yet, for the Victorians, this was life normal, expected and accepted without complaint. The beauty of their homes, the grace of their manners, all stood atop a foundation of grime and struggle hidden behind closed doors. The truth of a Victorian bathroom is that it was never just a room. It was a reminder of how fragile cleanliness truly was, and how much effort it took to chase it. You wouldn't last long in this world before longing for a single flush of modern relief. When you wake in a Victorian house, breathe in its air, and wash in its cold water, you're living in a world that doesn't yet fully understand what makes people sick. The very concept of germs is still controversial, and for most of the 19th century, disease is blamed on bad smells, dampness, or moral weakness. The air itself, the so-called miasma, is seen as the culprit. People fear the foul odors of decay far more than invisible microbes, because the science of infection is still taking shape. To step into this world is to step into a place where hygiene is half ritual, half guesswork, and where good intentions often lead to harm. Imagine being told that the smell of the city's smoke or of a sick room could make you ill. You'd burn incense, douse rags in vinegar, and hang flowers in every room, not realizing that none of it mattered. The true killers, bacteria and viruses, moved silently through water and touch, unseen and unstoppable. Even the doctors, with all their confidence and formality, are largely fumbling in the dark. They wear long coats, often stained from previous patients, and carry instruments cleaned only with a quick wipe. The idea that invisible life causes disease is not yet accepted. The very tools meant to heal often spread illness. In this house, cleanliness means something different than it does today. It's about order, not sanitation. Floors must shine, linens must be crisp, and the air must smell pleasant. But the concept of disinfecting truly killing germs is barely understood. Soap is used to scrub away visible dirt, but not because anyone believes it prevents infection. Doctors may still move from one sick room to another without washing their hands. In hospitals, patients with open wounds share rooms, instruments, even bedding. To live in this era is to live surrounded by unseen danger. If someone in the household falls ill, the response depends on superstition and class. A wealthy family might summon a doctor whose treatments could include bloodletting, purging, or doses of mercury and opium. For the poor, illness is endured in silence, with home remedies and prayer. A mother might steep herbs or soak cloths in vinegar to lay across a fevered brow, believing the scent itself could draw out sickness. The air smells of damp cloth and hope, yet death remains an all too frequent visitor. Coughs linger, fevers rise, and many never recover. A simple cold can become pneumonia. A cut can turn to sepsis. There are no antibiotics, no sterile bandages, no understanding of how easily infection spreads. You might notice how few people seem truly healthy. Children cough constantly, their cheeks flushed with the fever of minor infections that never fully leave them. Adults grow pale and tired, their lungs scarred by years of coal smoke. Tuberculosis, known as consumption, claims countless lives. It's romanticized in art and poetry, pale cheeks, delicate figures, but in reality, it's brutal. The coughing fits, the weight loss, the slow suffocation. People fear the sick, but don't yet know how to protect themselves. Bedrooms are aired out to chase away the bad air, but the disease remains, carried by droplets and close contact. Even something as simple as childbirth is perilous. Midwives and doctors, unaware of the importance of sterilization, move from one birth to another without washing their hands or tools. Childbed fever kills countless women, the invisible bacteria transferred from patient to patient. It isn't until the mid-1800s, when men like Ignaz Semmelweis and later Joseph Lister begin promoting hand-washing and antiseptic surgery, that change begins, but slowly, painfully slowly. Many in the medical profession resist the new ideas, too proud to believe that something unseen could make them responsible for spreading death. The Victorian obsession with cleanliness takes strange forms as germ theory slowly emerges. Disinfectants like carbolic acid begin to appear, their acrid scent filling hospitals and homes alike. People start boiling linens, scrubbing floors with harsh chemicals, and even fumigating rooms with sulfur to cleanse the air. But these practices coexist with old habits, perfumed powders, scented candles, and superstition. The house smells cleaner, but it isn't truly safe. Water is still drawn from questionable sources, and sewage seeps into the soil. The danger is everywhere, invisible and inescapable. You might feel the tension of living in a time when the truth is just within reach. Newspapers begin to mention microscopic life and bacteria, but the average person dismisses it as theory. A glass of water still looks clear, after all. A clean room still smells pleasant. The idea that something too small to see could kill you feels impossible to believe. Yet, as you wash your face in that same basin of reused water, as you drink tea brewed from water, fetched from a shared pump, you're part of a world built on that fragile illusion of safety. Illness shapes daily life in ways you might not expect. Families keep mourning clothes at hand. Death is always near. Children are buried young, their portraits painted posthumously. Homes reek of disinfectant one week and perfume the next, as life and loss intertwine. The Victorians are obsessed with health because they can never quite reach it. Every cold, every ache carries a shadow of fear. And yet, through sheer endurance, they persist living, loving, and building the modern world from the edge of ignorance. As you lie back in this imagined Victorian bed, you can feel the faint tickle in your throat from the coal smoke, the ache in your chest from the cold. You've washed, but not truly cleaned. You've breathed, but not freely. And you've seen what they could not see, that the world around them was alive with invisible forces. Germ theory may still be new, but its truth hovers in every drop of water, every cough, every breath. To live here, even for a single day, is to live at the mercy of the unseen. If you were to close your eyes inside a Victorian house, you'd be struck first by the quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It's the kind of silence that presses against your ears, broken only by the faintest sounds, the creak of floorboards, the soft tick of a mantel clock, the distant sigh of the wind squeezing through old windows. To modern ears, used to the background hum of life electricity, traffic, voices, music, the Victorian home feels unnaturally still. But if you listen longer, you realize it's not truly silent at all. It breathes, murmurs, and shifts with a rhythm of its own, both soothing and unsettling. During the day, the silence is punctuated by the muffled labor of the servants. From behind closed doors or below the floorboards, you hear the faint thud of coal being shoveled, the scrape of a broom, the clink of dishes in the scullery. The hierarchy of sound mirrors the hierarchy of the home. Quiet above, chaos below. Servants are trained to move silently, to speak only when spoken to. A well-run household is one where work happens invisibly, where the family hears nothing of the toil that keeps them comfortable. So the main rooms remain still polished, lifeless, almost sacred in their hush. And yet, when you listen closely, there are sounds everywhere. The faint hiss of the gas lamps, the rustle of heavy drapes, the subtle pop and crackle from the coal fire as it breathes. The house itself is alive with movement. The wood expands and contracts with the weather. Pipes gurgle faintly when water trickles through them. A clock chimes the quarter hour, its metallic echo lingering in the still air. These sounds would have been constant companions to Victorian life, subtle reminders of time passing in a world where days moved slowly, measured not by devices, but by rituals. At night, however, the soundscape shifts. Once the fires die down and the last candle is snuffed, the house grows darker and more mysterious. Every creak of the stairs, every groan of settling wood feels amplified. The silence becomes so complete that you can hear your own breathing. Outside, the wind rattles the windows and whispers through chimneys. Sometimes you hear the clip-clop of a horse-drawn carriage passing in the distance, the faint jingle of harness bells fading into the night. The sound drifts through the cold air, ghostly and fragile, before vanishing into silence again. In cities, this silence is deceptive. Beyond the thick walls, Victorian streets are alive with noise vendors shouting, wheels grinding on cobblestone, dogs barking, bells tolling the hour, and the occasional scream from a drunken passerby. The industrial hum of factories, the distant whistle of a train, or the rhythmic pounding of machinery all create a background roar that filters faintly into the home. But indoors, especially in middle or upper-class homes. Those sounds are muffled by thick curtains, heavy doors, and layers of drapery meant to seal off the outside world. The result is a strange duality, a world bursting with sound beyond the walls, yet eerily muted within them. Even conversation has its own rules. Voices are soft, controlled, polite. Laughter is quiet and brief. Children are told not to shout or run indoors. To raise your voice would be considered crude, improper, even disrespectful. Meals are accompanied by the gentle clink of silverware and the low murmur of conversation, nothing more. The absence of casual noise creates a certain tension. You are always aware of yourself, your breath, the sound of fabric rustling as you move. Every step echoes, every sigh feels intrusive. Silence is not comfort here, it's discipline. There is one exception to this stillness, the music of the house. In the evenings, when the family gathers, someone might sit at the piano or play the violin. The melody floats through the parlor, soft and wistful, echoing faintly off the walls. It's a moment of release, a brief escape from the day's restraint. The music doesn't fill the silence, it becomes part of it, threading through the quiet like a whisper. Songs of longing, hymns, and waltzes, played not for entertainment, but as a kind of self-soothing. For a few minutes, the house feels warm, human, alive. But when the music fades and the lights dim again, the hush returns. You might lie in bed, the sheets cold against your skin, and listen to the soft drip of water in the basin or the faint scuttle of a mouse behind the wall. Rats and mice are common in even the finest homes, their tiny claws scratching faintly through the wood at night. It's unsettling at first, then strangely normal. Every Victorian ear grew accustomed to those sounds, just as they learned to ignore the groan of the house as it breathed and settled. Silence in a Victorian home carries weight. It is not just the absence of sound, as a reflection of the era's restraint. Emotion, laughter, even pain were meant to be controlled. People spoke softly, moved deliberately, and kept their thoughts quiet. The result was a home that looked serene, but felt heavy, filled with unsaid things. In that stillness, you might find your mind wandering, your heartbeat loud in your chest. The quiet invites reflection, but also unease. It magnifies every sensation, every thought. If you stayed long enough, you'd begin to feel it the way the silence wraps around you, isolating and intimate at once. The faint crackle of the fire becomes your only company, the ticking of the clock your only reminder of time passing. The modern world, with all its hums and beeps, suddenly feels like a comfort you never appreciated before. Here, silence is not peace, it's presence. The house doesn't rest. It listens, breathes, and remembers. And in that living quiet, you begin to understand that the Victorian home was never truly still. It simply spoke in whispers the modern ear has forgotten how to hear. Getting dressed in a Victorian house is not simply about covering oneself. It's about constructing an identity, a social statement, and a moral declaration. The clothes you wear tell the world who you are, what class you belong to, and how respectable you seem. But with that elegance comes confinement, weight, and discomfort that no modern person could tolerate for long. Each morning begins with layers upon layers, and by the time you're fully dressed, you're wrapped in fabric, rules, and expectations that dictate how you move, breathe, and even think. For women, dressing is an event that takes time, skill, and help. The first layer is a chemise, a simple linen or cotton garment worn next to the skin. Over that come drawers, split at the crotch for convenience, though never spoken of openly, and thick wool stockings held up with garters. Then comes the corset, the most iconic and controversial piece of the era. It's made from stiff whalebone and tightly laced up the back, pulling the body into a narrow hourglass shape. Breathing becomes shallow. Bending is difficult. Comfort vanishes. Yet this discomfort is not just accepted, it's celebrated. A tight waist symbolizes control, discipline, and moral strength. To appear comfortable would be considered indecent. Over the corset comes the petticoats, sometimes several of them. Each one adds bulk and weight, wrestling with every step. Depending on the decade, you might wear a crinoline, a vast cage of steel hoops that extends your skirt outward in a bell shape. Walking through doorways becomes a calculation. Sitting down requires care. Later, the bustle replaces the crinoline, pushing the weight to the back of the skirt and giving the illusion of exaggerated curves. Layers of fabric press against your body, trapping heat in summer and dampness in winter. A single dress can weigh more than 10 pounds, and by midday, your shoulders ache beneath the fabric's constant pull. Dressing alone is almost impossible. Upper-class women rely on maids to fasten buttons, lace corsets, and adjust skirts. A proper lady must never appear disheveled, no matter how much discomfort she endures. The bodice must fit perfectly, the sleeves positioned precisely, and the collar pinned tightly at the neck. Jewelry and hair are added last, each piece carrying its own set of expectations. Even colors have meaning: subtle earth tones for modesty, black for mourning, soft pastels for youth and innocence. Fashion is not freedom. It's a form of control disguised as beauty. Men's clothing, though simpler, is no less restrictive. The average gentleman begins with a stiff collared shirt and heavy wool trousers, even in summer. A waistcoat adds another layer, followed by a starched cravat or tie that squeezes the neck. Over that comes a coat tailored, thick, and structured. A man must always look put together, never relaxed. Slouching is a moral failure, and perspiration is an embarrassment. Even leisure wear, when it exists, remains formal by modern standards. Every stitch reinforces discipline and order, a reflection of the strict hierarchy that governs the household itself. For the servants, clothing is a mark of their place. A maid's uniform is plain and functional, a simple dress of dark fabric, a starched white apron, and a small cap. It's meant to make her blend into the background, to symbolize humility and cleanliness. Comfort is irrelevant. Practicality is what matters. Her hands, red and rough from endless scrubbing, are hidden beneath thin gloves when she serves the family. For male servants, livery coats are heavy and hot, designed to project elegance rather than ease. No matter their exhaustion, their appearance must remain perfect. Clothing in the Victorian world is not about comfort, it's about respectability. Even within the privacy of one's home, people rarely dress down. To be improperly dressed is to risk moral judgment. Nightgowns are modest, bathing attire covers the body, and even undergarments are designed with propriety in mind. The body itself is something to be shaped, hidden, and controlled. Fashion magazines and etiquette guides remind readers constantly, the way you dress reflects your inner virtue. The corset is not merely an item of clothing. It's a symbol of self-restraint. You might try to imagine wearing such attire. The weight of the skirt pulling at your hips, the corset squeezing your ribs, the high collar pressing against your throat. Every movement feels calculated, deliberate. Sitting means perching, standing means enduring. There's a constant awareness of the body's limits. Breathing becomes shallow, heat gathers beneath the layers, and the faint smell of sweat mixes with perfume. By afternoon, your muscles ache and your skin feels raw beneath the fabric. And yet, in this world, comfort is a luxury too dangerous to desire. Children, too, are not spared. Young girls wear miniature versions of adult clothing, tight bodices, full skirts, lace collars. Boys are confined to wool suits and stiff shoes from an early age. Play is limited by what they wear. Movement itself becomes a learned behavior. To look proper is to be good, and to be good is to conform. Every thread, every stitch is a lesson in restraint. In the evening, when the day's duties are done, the act of undressing is almost a ceremony. Buttons unfasten, laces loosen, and the body finally exhales. You might feel a dizzy relief as your ribs expand freely again. But even then, a sense of freedom is fleeting. Tomorrow morning, the layers will return. The corset will tighten, the collar will rise, and the performance will begin again. Living in a Victorian house means living inside your clothing bound, shaped, and defined by it. It's not just fabric that wraps around you. It's expectation, status, and control. The polished surface of society depends on the discomfort beneath. And as you stand before the mirror, laced and layered, you realize that beauty here isn't about pleasure. It's about endurance. And endurance, more than anything, is the true hallmark of the Victorian life. A Victorian home was not just a place to live, it was a world of unspoken laws. Every gesture, every word, every movement carried meaning. The air itself seemed to hum with etiquette, a quiet but constant awareness of one's place and duty. For someone stepping into that world from the modern age, it would feel like walking through a minefield of invisible expectations. The rules of politeness weren't merely habits. They were survival tools. To break one could mean social embarrassment, or worse, moral condemnation. Inside the house, civility was everything and freedom was nowhere to be found. From the moment you entered a Victorian household, you were expected to behave according to your station. There was no casualness, no room for spontaneity. If you were a guest, you waited to be invited to sit. If you were a servant, you waited to be spoken to. The language itself was carefully controlled. Directness was considered rude. Conversation had to flow like a calm river, never too loud, never too personal, never too opinionated. Every sentence was a performance of restraint. Even laughter was measured, soft, and brief. The home, though filled with people, often felt eerily quiet. Gender dictated nearly every aspect of daily behavior. Men and women moved through the same rooms, but lived in entirely different worlds. The man of the house was expected to be firm, rational, and dignified. He worked outside, made decisions, and carried the weight of authority. The woman, by contrast, ruled the domestic sphere, a smaller, quieter kingdom, where her influence was subtle and invisible. She managed servants, oversaw meals, arranged flowers, and maintained the illusion of harmony. Her true labor was emotional, smoothing over conflicts, upholding reputation, and never allowing the strain to show. Her greatest virtue was patience. Every room in the house reflected these roles. The drawing room was the woman's domain, filled with delicate furniture, lace, and flowers. The study or smoking room belonged to the man. Dark wood, leather chairs, heavy curtains, and the faint smell of tobacco. Even the air felt different between them. A woman entering the study was an exception, just as a man lounging in the drawing room would seem improper. These spaces were more than rooms. They were symbols of balance, order, and the rigid separation of identity. Visitors, too, had to navigate the labyrinth of etiquette. A calling card left at the door could open or close the door to future invitations. You could not simply drop by unannounced. Even friendship had a schedule. Afternoon visits followed strict timing. 15 minutes was polite. Longer was presumptuous. Conversation stayed safely on neutral topics: weather, travel, society news. Personal feelings were rarely mentioned. It was a world built on surfaces, where smooth manners hid all the turbulence beneath. At the dinner table, hierarchy was reinforced through seating arrangements. The host and hostess sat at opposite ends, presiding over the ritual. Guests were placed according to status and gender, men and women alternating down the length of the table, conversation directed only to the person on your left or right. The servant who poured your wine moved silently, eyes down, trained to anticipate your needs without intruding. A clink of glass, a cough, a misplaced utensil, these were small but meaningful events. Even eating was governed by performance, a daily play of control. For the servants, the social rules were even stricter. They lived in the same building, but existed in a parallel world scene, but not acknowledged. Their presence was like furniture, necessary, but never remarked upon. They entered rooms through side doors, spoke softly, if at all, and vanished as soon as their task was done. A good servant was one who left no trace. Yet they saw and heard everything. Every family argument, every whispered confession, every secret illness, they carried them all, unspoken, as part of their invisible labor. To speak of what they saw would be unforgivable. Children, too, were bound by silence and order. They ate separately from adults, played in designated rooms, and spoke only when addressed. Obedience was their highest virtue. The family dynamic was one of formality, not warmth. Affection existed, but it was filtered through duty. A father might nod approvingly at a child's behavior rather than embrace them. A mother might express love by correcting posture or tone. To modern eyes, it might seem cold, but to Victorians, it was proper, respectable, and safe. Emotion was a private matter, something to be controlled, not displayed. Tears were a weakness. Anger was vulgar. Joy, if shown too openly, bordered on foolishness. Every feeling had to pass through the filter of composure. This was especially true for women, whose reputation depended entirely on grace under pressure. To lose control even once could mark her as unstable, unsuitable, or scandalous. So emotions were folded inward, hidden behind smiles and polite phrases. The cost of such restraint was immense. Inside those polished walls, countless unspoken feelings lingered like ghosts. Imagine trying to live under such constant scrutiny. Every movement measured, every word deliberate. You'd sit with your back straight, hands folded, speaking only when the moment was right. You'd think twice before laughing too loudly or expressing an honest opinion. You'd bow slightly when entering a room, curtsy when leaving, and thank servants without truly seeing them. It's a choreography of civility that demands endless awareness. For the Victorians, politeness was not just manners, it was morality. To be proper was to be good. And yet, behind all this order, there was exhaustion. People grew weary from pretending, from living as if under glass. Women suffered from nervous conditions that were little more than symptoms of repression. Men, burdened with constant composure, turned to drink or late-night escapes. Servants, crushed by invisibility, found solace in gossip whispered in the scullery after midnight. Beneath the quiet refinement, the Victorian home simmered with the strain of its own perfection. If you were to live in this world for even a day, you'd begin to feel it, that subtle tightening in your chest, the ache in your shoulders from holding yourself too straight. You'd long to laugh freely, to speak without calculation, to drop the mask. But in a Victorian house, the mask is never removed. The rules are everywhere, invisible yet unbreakable, binding everyone from the master to the maid. It's a house of manners, yes, but also a house of restraint. And every creak of the floorboard seems to remind you, even here, silence has rules. To be a child in a Victorian house was to live in a miniature version of the adult world, a world of rules, quiet voices, and watchful eyes. Childhood, as we understand it today, didn't truly exist. There was no belief in the boundless freedom or innocence of youth. Rather, children were viewed as small adults in training, beings to be molded into moral, obedient, respectable people. Play existed, yes, but only within narrow boundaries. Even laughter had limits. Every toy, every game, every lesson carried a hidden purpose, to prepare them for a lifetime of discipline. A typical Victorian morning for a child began early, often with the sound of the housemaid moving through the corridors or the chime of the breakfast bell. For the children of wealth, there was no lazy awakening or gentle morning light. It was routine from the very start. They were washed, dressed in stiff clothing, and escorted to the nursery or schoolroom. Their governess, a figure both teacher and warden, waited there, ready to begin lessons in reading, writing, arithmetic, and the more refined arts like French, drawing, and piano. The room smelled faintly of chalk, ink, and polish, and the atmosphere was serious. Smiles were rare. The governess ruled through quiet authority, neither friend nor family, but always near, always observing. For boys, the pressure was heavier. From an early age, they were trained to be stoic and firm, to hide emotion and show control. Their games, when allowed, mimicked war or industry building with blocks, playing soldiers, acting out the roles of explorers and empire builders. They were praised for bravery, punished for softness. Girls, meanwhile, learned how to sew, embroider, and pour tea without spilling a drop. They practiced their handwriting and posture, their curtsies and polite conversation. Their futures were not their own. Every lesson, every stitch was a rehearsal for the lives they were expected to live. Discipline was ever present. A misstep, a raised voice, a smudged page, a moment of playfulness during lessons could earn swift correction. Punishments varied. A stern lecture, time spent standing in the corner, or, for boys especially, the dreaded ruler across the knuckles. The belief was simple. Discipline built character, and character was the foundation of moral worth. Even affection was conditional, tied to obedience. Children learned quickly that silence and composure were safer than laughter. The sound of a parent's footsteps in the hallway could silence a room in an instant. Yet within this world of restraint, children still found ways to be children. The nursery, though orderly, was a small haven. Toys were simple wooden soldiers, dolls with porcelain faces, tin animals, spinning tops, and puzzles made of cardboard or carved bone. Books filled with moral tales lined the shelf, stories of virtue rewarded, disobedience punished, and lessons learned through suffering. Yet, between the lines, imagination thrived. Dolls became queens, soldiers explorers, and chairs mighty fortresses. The governess might look away for a moment, and in that brief window of freedom, laughter would break out like sunlight through a cloud. For the poorer families, childhood looked very different. There were no nurseries, no governesses, no toys. Children worked as soon as they were able, helping at home, in workshops, or even in factories. Their play came in snatched moments between labor, often outdoors, barefoot in the mud or cobblestones. Their games were improvised. Sticks became swords, stones became marbles. The laughter of these children was louder, freer, but shorter lived. Poverty left little room for innocence. Illness, hunger, and exhaustion aged them before their time. Still, even in the darkest corners of the industrial city, you could hear the echoes of their play brief, bright sparks of defiance against the weight of their world. Inside the middle and upper-class home, playtime was supervised and restrained. A game of cards or dominoes might be permitted in the parlor after lessons. Children were expected to sit neatly, speak softly, and never interrupt adult conversation. The parlor itself, with fragile ornaments, velvet curtains, and the ever-watchful portraits of ancestors, was not a playground but a stage. Every movement taught self-control. Even laughter was trained to sound polite, never wild. When guests visited, children were often displayed like well-groomed pets to be admired for their manners, and then sent away before they became a nuisance. At night, when the day finally ended, the nursery grew quiet. The governess dimmed the lamps, the fireplace flickered low, and the sound of the house settled around them. Outside, the muffled noise of the city hummed faintly. Inside, the children lay beneath heavy quilts, whispering to one another in the dark. In those whispered moments, they shared secrets, fears, and small rebellions. Perhaps they imagined adventures beyond the house forests, oceans, faraway lands where no governess or parent could find them. Their dreams were their only escape. The bond between siblings in such a world was sacred, forged in shared restraint. They learned to read each other's expressions, to communicate silently, to protect one another from the sharp edge of authority. A glance could say everything: a warning, a comfort, a shared joke at the absurdity of it all. Beneath the layers of formality, affection survived quietly, like a small flame hidden from the draft. If you spent a single day as a Victorian child, you'd feel the weight of expectation pressing down from morning to night. You'd sit up straight, fold your hands neatly, and speak only when invited. You'd swallow your laughter until it hurt. You'd long for just one moment of running barefoot in the grass, for air that smelled like freedom rather than polish and dust. And yet, even within the rules, you'd find your own small joys: a toy soldier, a favorite book, a warm hand of your sister under the table. The children of the Victorian house lived in quiet captivity, learning early that to survive meant to obey. But in their imagination, they built entire worlds, ones where rules bent and the air was full of sunlight. And in those hidden, fleeting moments of laughter, they kept something alive that the era itself tried so hard to suppress: the simple, uncontainable wonder of being young. No matter how grand or elegant a Victorian home appeared, it was never truly clean. Beneath the layers of lace and polish, danger lurked in the shadows, tiny, crawling, biting, and sometimes deadly. The age of refinement was also the age of infestation. Fleas and lice thrived in the seams of carpets and clothing. Rats skittered behind wainscoting, and unseen toxins filled the air. For all the scrubbing, polishing, and perfuming, the Victorian home was a living ecosystem of pests and poisons, an unending battle that no one ever truly won. Start with the bed, a supposed sanctuary. Beneath the embroidered covers and crisp linens lived legions of bedbugs. They hid in the crevices of wooden frames and in the stitching of mattresses stuffed with horsehair or straw. At night, they emerged in swarms, biting through skin to feed. Waking up with itchy welts was so common that people barely complained. Mattresses were dragged into the sun on occasion, beaten with sticks, and dusted with powders containing arsenic or mercury poisons meant to kill the pests, but that often sickened the people who used them. The faint, sweet smell of arsenic powder lingered in many bedrooms like a deadly perfume. Fleas were another constant torment. They jumped from pets to people, hiding in the folds of skirts or under the seams of stockings. Even the wealthiest families could not escape them. Servants sprinkled insect powder into carpets and under furniture, trying to drive the insects away, but the effort was in vain. The combination of heavy fabrics, coal soot, and poor ventilation created perfect breeding grounds for infestation. Parasites thrived in the warmth of the home, feeding on the very people who labored to keep it pristine. Rats and mice were as much a part of Victorian domestic life as candles and fireplaces. You could hear them at night soft scratching in the walls, the occasional scurry across the kitchen floor. In poorer neighborhoods, they were bold, darting through rooms in daylight. They chewed through sacks of flour, gnawed at wood, and carried fleas that spread disease. The rat catcher was a familiar profession, often roaming the streets with cages of writhing rodents. Poisoned bait, traps, and cats all played their part, yet the problem persisted. Rats were survivors, thriving in the same warmth and waste that people created. But perhaps the greatest danger of all was the invisible one, the poisons hiding in plain sight. Victorian homes were filled with toxic materials masquerading as beauty. Wallpaper printed with bright green arsenic pigment released deadly fumes into the air, especially in warm rooms. The brilliant color, known as Scheele's green, was considered fashionable, but many who lived surrounded by it developed chronic coughs, headaches, and even fatal illness. The same poison was used in clothing dyes, toys, and artificial flowers. A fashionable parlor could slowly be killing its occupants, one breath at a time. Other household poisons came from the very products meant to clean and beautify. Mercury was used in polishes, arsenic in rodent traps, lead in cosmetics and paint. Women whitened their faces with lead-based powders, unaware that they were slowly poisoning themselves. Children's toys were painted with toxic pigments and even teething rings were sometimes made from lead. Gas lighting, celebrated for its brightness, leaked fumes of carbon monoxide and sulfur into the air. The faint hiss of the gas lamps was the sound of unseen danger filling every room. Food and water offered no refuge. Milk was often adulterated with chalk or watered down to increase profits, and meats were preserved with formaldehyde or borax. Bread could contain alum to make it appear whiter, and sugar was sometimes bulked out with plaster. Water pipes made of lead leached poison into every sip. The Victorians took great pride in their progress, their science, their industry, their refinement, but they lived surrounded by toxins of their own creation. Every meal, every breath, every touch carried potential harm. The insects and poisons didn't only attack the body, they wore down the spirit. Housewives waged endless war against them, scrubbing floors with lye, scalding linens, fumigating rooms with sulfur, yet never achieving victory. The smell of chemicals mingled with that of damp, smoke, and decay. In the stillness of night, the faint buzz of a fly or the soft tap of a beetle could feel like mockery. The fight was eternal, invisible, and exhausting. Even the outdoors offered no escape. The garden soil might be fertilized with raw sewage from the city's waste systems, and the air was heavy with coal smoke. Flowers that appeared beautiful by daylight were coated with soot by morning. The very earth around Victorian homes was laced with contaminants from factories and streets. Cleanliness, no matter how vigorously pursued, was only ever an illusion. And yet, people endured it with a kind of resigned dignity. They hung curtains to hide the stains, burned incense to cover the smells, and spoke of pests only in whispers. Publicly, they upheld the ideal of the immaculate home, the moral fortress of the Victorian soul. Privately, they knew that behind the curtains and under the carpets, nature was reclaiming its space. If you were to spend a single night here, you'd notice it almost immediately, the faint tickle of something on your arm, the scent of chemicals sharp in the air, the sound of tiny feet behind the walls. You'd try to ignore it, to sleep, to convince yourself it's nothing. But the truth of the Victorian home is this: it was never still, never pure, never truly safe. The danger lived quietly in the corners, crawling through the cracks, breathing in the same air. And by morning, you'd understand that the enemy wasn't only the cold or the dirt, it was the house itself, beautiful and deadly all at once. As daylight fades and the house grows dim, the long Victorian evening begins. Without electricity, time itself slows down. The world shrinks to the rooms lit by candle or firelight, and the hours stretch endlessly ahead. There is no television, no radio, no hum of conversation from distant rooms. The silence settles thickly, interrupted only by the soft ticking of a clock and the occasional crackle of the hearth. For the modern visitor, the first few minutes might feel peaceful, but soon that stillness begins to feel heavy. The Victorians lived in a world of routine, repetition, and restraint, and nowhere was that more felt than in the long hours after sunset. Evenings were meant to be a time of civility and family gathering, but they followed a script as rigid as the day that came before. After dinner, the men might retire to the study or smoking room. There, the air would fill with the scent of tobacco and brandy, the low murmur of conversation about politics, business, or literature. The women, meanwhile, withdrew to the drawing room, a place of gentler sounds and softer light. They would pour tea, sit near the fire, and occupy themselves with embroidery, reading, or quiet talk. The separation was polite, expected, and rarely questioned. Men and women lived in parallel worlds under the same roof, joined only when decorum required it. In the drawing room, the atmosphere was one of refined calm. A piano might be opened, its polished surface gleaming in the firelight. Music was the heart of many Victorian evenings. A daughter would play a waltz, a hymn, or a popular tune of the day, while the others listened, their faces lit by flickering shadows. Conversation was gentle, never loud. Compliments were murmured. Every gesture was deliberate. The sound of the keys filled the air, a fragile beauty that momentarily lifted the gloom. But when the last note faded, the silence returned, deep and uneasy. For some, books offered escape. The Victorians loved reading, though even that came with rules. A respectable woman might read a novel by Dickens or Brontë, but never allowed in company. It was considered too intimate. Men read the newspaper, often aloud, punctuating the silence with the rustle of pages and the occasional sigh or comment. The flicker of candlelight made reading difficult, straining the eyes. Shadows danced across the paper. A misplaced draft could snuff the flame, plunging the room into darkness for a brief, startled moment before someone relit it. Every small act, turning a page, trimming a wick, refilling a lamp, became a ritual of patience. Entertainment was as much about appearance as enjoyment. Even laughter was restrained, practiced. Parlor games like charades, card games, or word puzzles might fill an hour or two, but they were never wild or spontaneous. Guests might visit for conversation or tea, but visits were formal and brief. A misplaced joke or an overly familiar tone could cause quiet scandal. Every evening was carefully curated to appear effortless. Beneath the surface, everyone was performing the polite host, the graceful lady, the attentive listener, all following invisible rules that made relaxation nearly impossible. For the servants, the evening was the busiest time of all. While the family sat in comfort, the staff below hurried to wash dishes, polish silver, and prepare for the next morning. The kitchen filled with the clatter of plates, the hiss of water, and the smell of soap and smoke. Upstairs, the drawing room was quiet. Below, life continued in sweat and motion. Once the family retired, the servants extinguished the lamps, drew the curtains, and crept back to their cramped quarters, too tired to speak. Even their evenings were ruled by silence. For those in smaller homes, without servants or luxury, the evening held different hardships. After a day's work, families gathered around a single fire, the only source of light and heat. The room smelled of smoke and damp clothing drying on chairs. Children read aloud from borrowed books, while parents mended clothes or peeled vegetables for the next day's meal. Conversation was sparse, exhaustion heavy. Outside, the streets were dark, dangerous, and uninviting. Night belonged to thieves, rats, and the distant echoes of drunken songs. Staying indoors was the safest choice, though it meant surrendering to monotony. In every household, rich or poor, boredom was a constant companion. Without distraction, time stretched painfully long. People wrote letters to pass the hours, slow, careful, informal missives that could take days or weeks to receive a reply. Journals were kept, prayers whispered, small crafts begun and abandoned. Even love was a quiet, patient affair, confined to glances and words written by hand. The loneliness of the age lived in those letters, the yearning for excitement, for freedom, for something more than the flicker of lamplight on the same familiar walls. As the night deepens, the house grows quieter still. The fire burns low, candles sputter, and the shadows lengthen. The ticking clock becomes louder, its rhythm a reminder that the world outside sleeps while this one waits for morning. A final cup of tea, a whispered good night, the creak of stairs beneath careful feet. Bedrooms await with their cold sheets and drafty windows. The last light goes out, and the silence returns thick, total, and absolute. You might think the Victorians were comfortable in this stillness, but the truth is that many struggled with it. Loneliness was common. Anxiety, though unnamed, filled the silence like smoke. The mind wandered in those hours toward regrets, desires, fears that could not be spoken aloud. In the absence of distraction, the house itself seemed to think. Every sound felt amplified: the crack of the fire, the distant carriage, the groan of settling wood. Spend just one Victorian evening, and you'd understand the patience it demanded. Without screens, without electric light, without escape, the hours become long and strange. The beauty of it lies in the slowness, the sound of turning pages, the glow of the fire, the faint notes of a piano. But beneath that beauty lingers the weight of boredom, pressing down like the dark itself. And by midnight, even the soft ticking of the clock would begin to sound like eternity. As the long Victorian evening winds down, the house begins its slow retreat into darkness. Servants move quietly through the corridors, extinguishing lamps, drawing curtains, and locking doors. The faint smell of oil and smoke lingers in the air. Upstairs, bedrooms glow with a single candle or the dim orange light of the fire's last coals. It is time for sleep, but in the Victorian house, sleep is not rest. It is ceremony, preparation, and at times, quiet fear. For even in slumber, the era's discomforts never truly leave. The nightly routine begins early, long before the house falls silent. For the mistress, it is a slow ritual of undoing the day's armor-unfastening buttons, unlacing corsets, removing layers of fabric heavy with the scent of coal and perfume. Her maid assists patiently, folding each garment with care. The air is cold. Even the act of undressing sends shivers through her spine. The chemise she changes into is thin, and her breath fogs faintly as she exhales. She moves to the washstand, where a basin of water, now lukewarm, waits for her to cleanse her face and hands. The soap is harsh, the towel rough, the water never truly clean. There is no running tap to rinse away fatigue. Just the quiet splash of water in a porcelain bowl and the dim reflection of her tired face in the mirror. For the master, the evening is shorter, more perfunctory. He removes his boots by the fire, perhaps reads a few pages of a newspaper, and changes into his nightshirt. His hands still smell faintly of tobacco and brandy. The candle flickers beside the bed, its flame bending with each breath of air. He blows it out when ready, but not without caution. Open flames and heavy drapery make dangerous companions. Fires were among the greatest fears of Victorian households. The combination of coal embers, gaslight, and fabric meant that one careless mistake, a curtain too close to a candle, a spark from the grate, could reduce a home to ash within minutes. In wealthier homes, the bedrooms are large but rarely warm. The fireplace provides a faint circle of comfort, leaving the corners of the room swallowed by cold. The smell of soot lingers faintly, and the air feels thick, unmoving. Beds are tall, massive things with carved wooden frames and heavy curtains that hang around them like theater drapes. The curtains, meant to keep warmth in, also trap stale air and dust. Within, the mattress is stuffed with horsehair or straw, sometimes feathers if the household can afford it. The bedding feels stiff, the sheets rough against the skin. Blankets are heavy, and once beneath them, movement becomes difficult. The darkness in a Victorian bedroom feels absolute. With the lamps extinguished and the fire dying, there is no soft glow of electronics, no light leaking from outside. Just the faint orange pulse of coals in the grate, and the sound of the house breathing wood settling, the distant whisper of wind through a crack in the window. You lie still, staring into nothing. The silence is both comforting and uneasy. Every sound stands out: the creak of a board, the drip of water in the basin, the faint scratch of something behind the wall. In this age, rats and mice are not rare visitors. Nor are the bedbugs, whose tiny movements become unbearable when you know they are there but cannot see them. The rich might have bed warmers, a metal pan filled with glowing coals slid between the sheets before bedtime. It makes the bed inviting but dangerous. One careless movement, and the fabric could smolder. Servants perform this duty with quiet precision, aware that a single spark could spell disaster. Many slept with the faint smell of burning metal in the air, trusting luck more than safety. The idea of a sudden blaze haunted every home. Stories of families lost to fire-filled newspapers, and people often kept a small bucket of sand or water beside the hearth as a token defense. In less affluent homes, the bedroom is shared. Children sleep together for warmth, bundled beneath threadbare quilts. Parents rest nearby, exhausted from labor. The fire, if there is one, dies quickly, leaving the air icy. Frost creeps along the window panes. In such darkness, dreams come quickly, heavy and deep, interrupted only by the coughs of illness or the groan of wind through the roof. The smell of dampness mixes with that of unwashed linens, old smoke, and humanity. Sleep is less a retreat and more a truce with discomfort. Even in upper-class households, sleep is never private. Servants might enter quietly to stir the fire or empty a chamber pot. The sound of footsteps in the hallway is common, as are faint whispers carried through the floorboards. Privacy, in the modern sense, simply doesn't exist. The house feels alive around you, its walls thin, its air filled with unseen presence. You are never entirely alone. The flicker of firelight across the wallpaper looks almost like movement, and the silence hums with something just beneath perception. It is no wonder that Victorians were fascinated by ghosts. So many of them lived in houses that already felt haunted by their own sounds. Before sleep, some pray. Others read from the Bible by candlelight, or simply stare into the dying fire. There's a solemnity to the act, as though each night were an ending unto itself. The body lies heavy under the weight of the blankets, corset marks still faintly pressed into the skin. The warmth comes slowly from your own body heat until the air beneath the covers grows stifling. You turn, adjusting to the hardness of the mattress, and pull the curtains tight. The world outside ceases to exist. As the last ember fades, the darkness becomes complete. Your mind drifts uneasy through the quiet. Perhaps you dream of the day's labors, of warmth, of light. Or perhaps you wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding at a sound you can't name. A crack, a whisper, a breath of wind. There's no switch to flip, no light to chase away fear. Only the faint orange glow of the dying fire, the cold air on your face, and the realization that in this house, even sleep demands endurance. The Victorian bedroom is a paradox, a place of rest that offers no rest, a refuge filled with danger. It is a reminder that comfort, like warmth and safety, was a privilege few truly possessed. In this world, even closing your eyes was an act of trust in the house, in the servants, in the flickering flame that stood between you and the dark. It's morning again in the Victorian house, but as the gray light seeps through the curtains, you feel it, the weight in your chest, the dull ache in your throat, the faint taste of soot in the back of your mouth. You've been breathing the house for days now, and it's begun to leave its mark. The truth is that most Victorian homes, however beautiful, were slow instruments of sickness. The very walls, floors, and furnishings that looked so refined were built with materials and habits that poisoned the people who lived within them. Illness wasn't something that came from the outside. It was born and nurtured inside the home itself. The air, thick and still, carries the first hint of trouble. Coal fires burn in nearly every room, their smoke filling the lungs with fine black dust. Chimneys leak fumes that creep back into the parlor, invisible but ever present. Gas lamps hiss faintly, releasing carbon monoxide and sulfur that sting the nose and eyes. Windows, sealed tightly against drafts, trap all of it inside. There is no circulation, no cleansing breath. The Victorians feared bad air, but ironically, it was their obsession with shutting it out that made their homes toxic. The smell of coal, once comforting, now clings to your skin like illness itself. The dampness doesn't help. In winter, condensation beads on the windows and trickles down into the wood. Carpets absorb the moisture, harboring mold that grows unseen beneath furniture. Even fine homes suffer from damp plaster and mildew. The wallpaper, rich with ornate designs and printed with arsenic-based dyes, slowly releases poisonous dust into the air. When the walls are scrubbed, the toxins spread even faster. People begin to complain of headaches, nausea, or a strange green tinge to their skin, never realizing that the very decor meant to show refinement is silently poisoning them. Then there's the dust, the endless dust that settles on every surface, no matter how often it's cleaned. It carries soot, ash, animal hair, and the remnants of burning coal. Servants sweep it up daily, coughing into their sleeves, but it's a losing battle. The lungs of the Victorian household were blackened by their own comfort. The domestic cough, as some called it, afflicted everyone. You could hear it throughout the house, the shallow, rasping sound of air struggling past irritated throats. Doctors might call it catarrh or bronchitis, but the cause was simple: the home itself was suffocating its inhabitants. Water, too, brought sickness. Pipes were made of lead, and over time they leached poison into every glass drawn from the tap. In poorer homes, water came from communal pumps, often located frighteningly close to cesspools and drains. Outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and dysentery swept through cities, carried silently in the very thing people drank. The Victorians believed disease came from filth, but they didn't yet understand that it was microscopic life in the water that killed them. Even the most diligent housekeeper, scrubbing endlessly to maintain purity, could never make her home safe from what she couldn't see. Ventilation was a topic of endless debate. Open windows were discouraged. Night air, it was said, carried death. Bedrooms stayed shut tight, even as the fires burned low and the air grew stale. A sick room might reek of sweat, carbolic soap, and decay, but few dared open the window. Curtains trapped the smell, pillows absorbed it, and the patient breathed it in again and again. The result was a cycle of illness that fed itself, generation after generation. A family might seem cursed, when in truth, their home was quietly, efficiently undoing them. Even the furniture held danger. Upholstery stuffed with horsehair or wool gathered dust and damp, breeding mites and mold. Mattresses sagged and blackened with years of use. Cleaning them meant beating them outside, sending clouds of filth into the air. Decorative rugs, prized for their luxury, trapped soot and animal dander. Polishes and cleaning products, many containing ammonia or arsenic, added chemical fumes to the mix. The home smelled of order and polish, but beneath the surface, it was an ecosystem of slow decay. For women, who spent much of their lives indoors, the toll was especially cruel. The air they breathed, the corsets that constricted their lungs, and the constant exposure to fumes and dust wore their bodies down. Fainting, headaches, and nervous exhaustion were common diagnoses, polite names for what was often poisoning and oxygen deprivation. Doctors prescribed rest, tonics, or seaside air, but rarely questioned the true cause, the house itself. The more beautiful the home, the more dangerous it often was. The fine draperies, the painted walls, the sealed windows, all symbols of progress, were also instruments of decline. In industrial cities, the danger multiplied. Outside, soot fell like black snow, covering rooftops and windowsills. Inside, it mingled with the smoke of stoves and lamps. The air had weight to it, a tangible thickness that clung to lungs and skin. Children coughed through the night, their faces pale beneath layers of grime. Tuberculosis spread easily in these conditions, its victims wasting away slowly, breath by breath. The disease was so common that entire households expected to lose someone to it. Death didn't shock them anymore. It simply arrived, quiet and inevitable, like the morning frost. The irony is that Victorians prized their homes as sanctuaries. They believed in the moral purity of domestic life, in the ideal of the tidy, respectable household. They hung lace at the windows and swept their steps clean, believing cleanliness could guard against misfortune. But beneath that order lay decay. The home was a closed system, recycling its own toxins. The people who lived in it, breathing, burning, washing, scrubbing, were both its caretakers and its victims. If you stayed long enough, you'd begin to feel what they felt: the heavy lungs, the dull fatigue, the dizziness that creeps in after hours spent in stale air. You'd cough without meaning to, your throat raw from the smoke. Perhaps your skin would itch from the fabric dyes, your eyes sting from the fumes of polish. You might long to step outside, to take a deep breath of fresh air, but outside, the streets are thick with fog and soot. There is no escape. The Victorian house, for all its grandeur, is a beautiful trap. And yet, within those walls, life continued: births, dinners, laughter, and love. People adapted, endured, and carried on, unaware that every moment spent indoors chipped away at their health. They called it progress, civilization, refinement. But in truth, they lived inside a slow illness made of their own making. The house, that proud symbol of comfort and success, was slowly, quietly consuming them from within. Beneath all the refinement and order of a Victorian home lies something quieter, harder to see: a constant, heavy pressure on the mind. The same walls that protect you from the world also trap you within it. The silence, the rules, the endless routines, all are meant to bring stability. But what they often create instead is isolation. The Victorian house doesn't just shape how you live. It shapes how you think, how you feel, how you hide the parts of yourself that don't fit the mold. After just a day within these walls, you begin to feel it: the slow tightening of composure, the weight of appearances, the strain of living behind a mask. The home is everything in this world: your fortress, your stage, your prison. To the outside world, it must appear perfect. Curtains drawn just so, silver polished, carpets spotless. But perfection has a price. Behind those immaculate walls, people grow lonely, anxious, and tired. The pressure to appear calm and proper at all times leaves little room for vulnerability. Emotions, especially for women, are something to be hidden or subdued. Anger is unladylike. Sadness is weakness. Desire is shameful. So feelings are pressed down, layer by layer, like the corsets that constrict their bodies. The result is an entire society trained to smile while quietly breaking inside. For men, the weight is different, but no less suffocating. The ideal of the Victorian gentleman demands composure, control, and moral authority. A man must not complain, must not weep, must never show weakness. He works long hours, carries the burdens of family and reputation, and returns home to play the role of provider and patriarch. Any sign of softness risks undermining his authority. Many turn instead to solitude, spending long hours in studies, smoking rooms, or clubs, surrounded by other men, speaking of business or politics, but never of their hearts. The silence between them is its own kind of pain. Marriage, too, can feel like a polite performance. Affection exists, but it is filtered through duty and etiquette. Physical intimacy is veiled in secrecy and guilt. Women are taught that passion is indecent. Men, that indulgence is base. The result is distant, a cold civility that fills the space between husband and wife. They dine together, walk together, even sleep in adjoining rooms, yet remain strangers in many ways. Behind closed doors, some write in secret journals or letters never sent, expressing emotions they cannot speak aloud. The walls of the house hear everything but tell nothing. For servants, the psychological toll is sharper still. Their lives are ruled by obedience and invisibility. They rise before dawn, speak only when necessary, and spend their days catering to the needs of others. They are part of the household, yet never truly belong to it. Every smile, every "yes, ma'am," or "at once, sir," is a small act of survival. Loneliness follows them through the corridors, into their tiny attic rooms. Even among other servants, conversation is hushed, guarded. The master's mood dictates their peace. To be seen is to risk rebuke. To be unseen is to vanish altogether. Children grow up in this atmosphere of restraint, learning early that silence is safer than honesty. Their emotions are corrected out of them. Curiosity becomes mischief. Excitement becomes improper behavior. They learn to smile when praised and remain calm when scolded. The world they inhabit is small, confined to the nursery and the schoolroom, and their imagination becomes their only refuge. Many grow into adults who no longer know how to express what they feel. The repression that begins in childhood ripples outward, shaping the psychology of an entire generation. Loneliness becomes a constant companion. Letters replace conversation. Journals replace confession. People pour their hearts into ink because paper is the only thing that listens without judgment. The diaries of the time are filled with words like melancholy, nervousness, exhaustion. Doctors call it hysteria neurasthenia or moral fatigue, but these are only names for the same ache, the quiet despair of being unable to be fully human in a world that values restraint above all else. The very act of feeling too much becomes a kind of illness. For women especially, this emotional suffocation often manifests physically. They faint, tremble, lose appetite, or develop mysterious ailments that no one can explain. Doctors prescribe rest cures, isolation, or worse, confinement. Some women spend months in dimly lit rooms, forbidden to read or write, told that their minds are too fragile for thought. The cure, they say, is obedience and stillness, precisely the conditions that caused the suffering in the first place. The line between healing and control blurs, and many lose themselves entirely in the quiet. The house itself mirrors this mental strain. It is grand yet claustrophobic, full of rooms you are not meant to enter, conversations you are not meant to hear. The ticking of the clock becomes a constant reminder of passing time, of life lived in repetition. You begin to sense that the home is not merely inhabited, it possesses. The longer you stay, the more it seeps into you. You walk slower, speak softer, breathe shallower. Even your thoughts begin to move in measured steps, careful not to make noise. But despite it all, moments of rebellion flicker like candlelight. A woman writes poetry in secret, her verses hidden between the pages of a Bible. A man, alone in his study, allows himself to cry for reasons he can't name. A servant hums softly while cleaning, a small act of defiance against the endless silence. Children whisper stories in the dark, inventing worlds where rules dissolve and laughter is allowed. These small acts of life, though fleeting, are the soul's resistance to the crushing weight of propriety. By the end of your 24 hours in a Victorian house, the physical discomfort, cold, smoke, tight clothing fades into the background. What remains is the mental strain, the feeling that you must constantly perform, constantly suppress, constantly endure. The beauty of the home hides a quiet ache that seeps into everyone who lives within it. You can almost hear it in the walls, the sighs, the swallowed tears, the unspoken words. The true cost of Victorian life wasn't just in hardship or labor, but in the price of emotional honesty. To live here is to live behind glass, polished and clear, but impenetrable. You can see the world, but never touch it freely. Every comfort comes with a rule. Every smile hides exhaustion. And somewhere deep inside the stillness, you begin to understand that this house, for all its elegance, was never built for peace. It was built for endurance, and endurance, in the end, is the loneliest virtue of all. You've made it 24 hours in a Victorian house. And now, as the last embers fade and dawn begins to stir, you can feel the weight of the day still clinging to you. The soot in your throat, the stiffness in your limbs, the chill that no number of blankets could chase away. You've breathed the heavy air, worn the endless layers, followed the silent rules, and endured the stillness that pressed down on every mind and heart that lived within these walls. What looked elegant from the outside lace curtains, glowing fires, polished silver was, in truth, a world of labor, discomfort, and quiet endurance. It was beauty built on burden. As you walk once more through the parlor, the faint gray light of morning creeps through the curtains. The furniture sits motionless, the air heavy with yesterday's smoke. The house is quiet, as though exhausted by its own expectations. You might imagine the faint rustle of skirts, the distant clink of dishes below, the hum of the city waking under a blanket of fog. But for now, it's just you and the lingering echoes of a world that demanded perfection at every turn. You can almost feel the presence of those who once lived here, their voices swallowed by time, their stories trapped in the very walls they tended and suffered within. The truth is, most of us wouldn't last a full day here. We're too used to warmth that arrives with the turn of a dial, to light that glows at a touch, to air that flows clean and clear through modern walls. The Victorian house, for all its grandeur, was a place that demanded constant effort, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Every hour was a negotiation between survival and decorum, between the body's needs and society's rules. And yet, for all its hardship, there's a strange beauty in it too. The slow pace, the candlelight, the attention to detail, all the things they endured, created the very rhythms we now romanticize. Perhaps that's the real lesson left behind in these creaking halls. That comfort, as we know it, is a new invention, and that endurance was once an art. The people who lived here didn't have the luxury of ease, but they had something else: patience. In every polished floor and carefully tended fire, there was a quiet defiance against the world's chaos. They made order out of struggle, grace out of exhaustion. And while we could never live as they did, we can still listen to the echoes they left behind, the whispers of their daily lives, the heartbeat of an age that shaped our own. So as you close your eyes and let the last images of this house fade, take a breath. The soot and chill of the Victorian world dissolve, replaced by the soft warmth of the present. You're safe, comfortable, surrounded by quiet that doesn't feel heavy. Maybe that's something to be grateful for, that we can visit the past without having to live in it. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, walking through the world of the Victorians. If you found peace in this story, or if you enjoy drifting into the past before sleep, please take a moment to subscribe to Asterisk History for Sleep Asterisk. It helps us continue to bring these forgotten worlds to life. And in the comments, let us know what part of history you'd like to dream about next and when you listen in. We love hearing from you. For now, rest easy. Let the past fade gently, like the glow of an oil lamp at the end of a long night. You've survived your day in a Victorian house. And with that, the house sleeps once more.